On December 18th of 2009, James Cameron's latest cinematic opus was unleashed upon theaters. It has been nearly over a decade since Cameron had released a major theatrical movie, and it seemed like Avatar would be his biggest bet yet. A sprawling epic that sought to push the limits of digital effects and bring 3D filmmaking beyond the confines of Liberty Science-centric documentaries about sea turtles. James Cameron had always been looking to make his Star Wars a sci-fi magnum opus, and it seemed like it would be his riskiest venture yet, making a very expensive 3D epic about blue cat people looking to fight off the forces of industrialization. The concept was just too bizarre to be financially successful. Audiences had already seen this story before in Dances with Wolves, The Last Samurai, and Ferngully. It was poised to be a huge flop, especially when it only grossed a paltry $77 million in its opening weekend. It seemed like it was doomed to never recoup the nearly decade spent in R&D or the $237 million it needed for its budget. But it did something that we almost never see anymore in the modern film landscape. It kept playing and playing and playing. People kept coming back. They were enraptured by the world of Pandora. There were support groups of people who became depressed about the fact that it wasn't real, and they couldn't go there. The movie even invented a new medical condition of PADS, or post-Avatar depression. James Cameron's greatest gamble would be his greatest triumph yet, becoming the highest-grossing film of all time, a feat that took the collective effort of the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, culminating in Avengers Endgame, to overthrow. But Avatar took back its crown after a re-release, making nearly $3 billion in total. But in the time since Avatar has vanished from the pop culture landscape entirely, almost as if it wasn't even there. The fandom is next to non-existent. You don't see anyone cosplaying as Na'vi at conventions or dressing up like them for Halloween. Avatar is completely evaporated, like it almost never existed. Hell, you could say that there's only one Avatar that still has an active fan base, and that is, of course, Avatar: The Last Airbender. But now the drought is over. Avatar 2: The Way of Water is premiering in December, over a decade after the first movie was released. With new technology developed for motion capturing underwater, James Cameron is looking to not make one sequel, but up to 4 of them. But the question is, after investing nearly $1 billion into these movies, does anyone still care about Avatar?
You gotta love to be gone back yet. Love turns into having don't you grab it.
So if you're to judge it purely by internet discourse, Avatar 2 should be dead on arrival. It'll underperform because nobody cares about Avatar anymore. The cultural appropriation of Native American and indigenous cultures is cringe to modern Gen Z audiences. The film's universe is quite literally the manifestation of a white savior narrative that has become taboo and shunned in popular culture. The kind of thing that makes writers for progressive blogs start greedily salivating over the prospect of ripping it apart in a self-righteous fury. You know, the kind of thing you see in movies like The Last Samurai, Last of the Mohicans, and Dances with Wolves, where a white guy comes into a foreign culture, adapts to it, and finds some sort of spiritual rebirth and co-opts the culture and try and defend it from external colonization by other bad white people. I'm sure there are a billion BreadTube videos on why this kind of narrative has become politically untenable. And you could argue that maybe Avatar skirts around it since it depicts a fictional alien culture, but because the Na'vi takes so much inspiration from Native American and other indigenous cultures, the idea that a white guy literally transfers his consciousness to take over a blue body and join them and become one of them is seen as the height of cringe. If you want to see how the current youth would probably think of Avatar now, look no further than the popular podcast Welcome to Night Vale. The whole thing is designed to be a Prairie Home Companion parody, which is built to appeal to the Tumblr Hot Topic set that features a fictional radio broadcast describing a desert town where all the conspiracy theories are real. In it, they describe a helpful character known as the Apache Tracker, who's a white guy who wears an Indian headdress.
The Indian Tracker, now, I don't know if you've seen this guy around. He's the one that appears to be of maybe Slavic origin, yet wears an Indian headdress out of some racist cartoon and claims to be able to read tracks on asphalt. He appeared on the scene and swore that he would discover the truth. No one responded because it's really hard to take him seriously in that headdress of his.
The whole joke is that despite the character is well-meaning and helpful, everyone in town is embarrassed and ashamed by his cultural appropriation, which they see as disgusting and something that they would never dare besmirch the good name of their local city. That's what I think the BuzzFeed and the TikTok people would probably think of Avatar at this point. Time has not been kind to the Avatar heads. You see next to no fan culture for it, no one references it, Nobody speaks Na'vi, and I wouldn't be surprised if all the Gen Z kids on TikTok don't even remember it. And if they did, I'm sure we'd see a glut of content talking about how outraged they are that this was allowed to be made in the bygone year of 2009. The movie is completely absent from meme culture. It's just weird that something so big could feel like this strange part of forgotten pop culture history, where a spell was cast upon the entire world and everyone suddenly became a furry obsessed with CGI blue cat people and fantasized about the idea of hair fucking. I think what most people fail to understand, though, is that James Cameron is easily one of the most successful commercial directors of all time. James Cameron has never failed at anything he's ever tried. He's never made a bad movie. Seriously, go back and look at his filmography and find me the bad movie. Maybe you could argue it was Piranha 2, but that was a work-for-hire directing gig, and even that experience gave him the dream, the clout, and the networking to eventually make The Terminator. James Cameron does not miss. Not only does he not miss, but he's also the king of sequels. Terminator 2, Aliens. These are films that built upon the backs of their predecessors and both took the core concepts of the original films and not only exploded them, but expanded on them tremendously. Like, this is a man who does not make bad movies, who is responsible for making some of the greatest sequels, and is now making a sequel to his greatest achievement and the culmination of his life's work. There's this great story I love about James Cameron, where he used to be a truck driver who occasionally went to community college. He was an angry man jotting down sci-fi short stories in his spare time. Then he saw Star Wars, and he was angry and super bitter. Here was a man who'd done everything he wanted to, achieved his greatest ambition in cinematic form of bringing his sci-fi vision to life on film. It was his anger at George Lucas that made him completely change his outlook on life. In my own personal headcanon, I like to think James Cameron ran out of that theater and it was raining heavily and he clenched his fists, shaking in the air while screaming bitterly at the heaven. "I will beat you, George Lucas! I will crush you, the man who took my dream first!" Then, like a Hulk fueled by an all-consuming rage, he proceeded to push forward, making one cinematic hit after another. Some people like to have the wholesome figures as their personal creative heroes, people who are willing to put their best foot forward and always say the right thing. That's never really worked for me. To me, the best creators are the bitterest, angriest people who manage to take that unbridled rage and focus it creatively. Because I think the best art doesn't come from people who spout empty euphemisms like live, laugh, love. It doesn't come from hustle culture gurus telling you to go out and get it, bring back that bread, hustle harder. It comes from angry people who channel that rage and dysfunction into their work. That's why I'm such a big Dan Harmon fan, and I love writers and directors who channel that rage productively. And if nothing else, James Cameron is the ultimate rage monster. He's like this Lovecraftian filmmaking monster who only occasionally emerges from the dark deep once every decade to fundamentally change the world of cinema before receding back to the depths he once came from. In 2007, he unleashed Titanic, which became the highest-grossing film of all time and launched Leonardo DiCaprio into the realm of superstardom and created the last great practical effects epic in Hollywood, in line with the epics of past centuries like Gone with the Wind. Then he completely dropped out of public view before he came back with Avatar and beat himself, becoming the only person in history with the number 1 and number 2 highest-grossing films of all time. He single-handedly created a period of mainstream filmmaking where theaters forced filmgoers to endure 3D movies as the next big thing to try and jack up ticket prices. Most films were not filmed or explicitly made for 3D like Avatar, which intentionally had a very bright color palette to counteract the dim tint of the glasses. And of course, most of the other movies sucked. 3D still exists, but is much less prevalent than it used to be. Now, over a decade since, James Cameron is back and at it again, doing it all underwater, because if there's not some ridiculous technical challenge to overcome, then what's the point of even making the goddamn movie? I don't think anyone would ever accuse him of being subtle. But I do think that pound for pound, James Cameron is easily the most competent and successful mainstream filmmaker. He understands how to construct stories that will appeal to the broadest audience possible by writing big, broad, relatable characters that audiences love. A lot of people accuse Avatar of having a pretty simplistic, basic bitch pro-environmentalist story. To that, I'd argue the more things you need to have the audience get on board with, the simpler you need to make your story beats for mass appeal. Cameron wanted to introduce people to this big, expansive world where blue cat people would use their hair as USB drives to jack into animals and plants and commune with nature. The movie has an extended hair fucking sequence.
Take your hair and stick it in me! Stick it in me and ride me! Ride me, Torak Makto, like I'm the last Palalak on Pandora!
Not to mention the idea of the avatar itself, where you move your consciousness into a vat-grown body of a blue cat person. If you want to get a normcore audience on board with all of this, then you need a conventional narrative to wrap all this looniness around. It's a lesson that George Lucas forgot between the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy of Star Wars, but it's one that Cameron understands fundamentally as a filmmaker. There's a great video by film YouTuber Patrick H. Willems where he breaks down the tenets of James Cameron's action, why he's so effective and successful as a writer-director. I'd recommend watching the whole thing, and I'll include a link in the description, but here are a few excerpts explaining what he accomplishes so well in his previous movie, as well as Avatar itself.
James Cameron might be the best action filmmaker of all time. James Cameron has only made 7 movies, but those 7 include the 2 biggest films of all time and some of the most famous action movies ever made. As huge and expensive as his movies are, his action scenes aren't excessive or indulgent. The storytelling is clear and focused. His goal isn't to be cool, it's to be exciting. The first lesson we can learn from Cameron is to keep the stakes high and the odds stacked against the character. In every Cameron action scene, the protagonists are totally outmatched. But in Cameron's action scenes, we think, how the hell are they gonna survive this? Cameron's action scenes are motivated by the same things that motivate horror set pieces. Unstoppable forces trying to kill the characters. So the whole big climactic battle scene in Avatar is like 80% CGI, obviously with performance capture used for a lot of the characters. It would be easy for us to disengage from what's happening since it's almost all created in a computer. But the choice Cameron makes that is so important is to shoot it exactly like it were regular live action. A common thing you'll see with mostly CG action scenes are these shots where the camera flies through space in a way that would be impossible in live action. But in Avatar, the camera always behaves like a real physical one. It doesn't do anything a real camera couldn't do. Cameron manages to keep this whole sequence of giant blue people on dragons fighting helicopters grounded. Even when it's an almost totally CG scene, Cameron sticks to the same principles of action storytelling that he's had through all his films. Because in action, it is essential. And Cameron always makes sure the geography is absolutely clear. We always know where every character is in relation to each other. We always understand the geography of the location, with action happening simultaneously in the air and on the ground with a ton of characters. This could easily get chaotic, but Cameron orients us by, at all times, keeping the bad guys facing right and the good guys facing left. No matter where in the battle we are at any given time, we always understand what's happening just from how the characters are framed.
That's why his action is so good. It's always about clean cuts, giving the audience perspective on what is going on and where everyone is, and having realistic camera movements that tell your brain this is cinema versus an elaborate green screen CGI cartoon where everyone is zipping around. It's easy to forget about that after a decade of Marvel movies. For a brief period of time, people celebrated when Avengers Endgame became the highest grossing film of all time, finally dethroning Avatar. Screw the lame blue cat people and the cringe Ferngully environmentalist message. The combined experiment of the Marvel Cinematic Universe had culminated its 10-year experiment by finally overthrowing James Cameron's cringy environmental opus. Eventually, Avatar reclaimed its crown through a remastered re-release, and as of now, it still has the title of the highest grossing film of all time. But it seems like James Cameron needs that rage to justify his creative endeavors. It's been stated that if the upcoming movie wasn't either the 4th or 5th highest grossing film of all time, that it wouldn't make its money back. Like, if the man doesn't have anything to be angry at, if he doesn't have the specter of his dad in the back of his head calling him a failure, then there's nothing pushing him forward. Making a movie for money is easy. Letting your franchise linger and die and fall to the wayside of pop culture history while everyone laughs at your ill-conceived sequels while superhero tripe infests cinemas across the globe? Now that's a real motivator. People say Avatar is dead on arrival, but they said the same thing about the first movie after its soft opening weekend, and they said the same thing about Titanic when it legendarily went over budget. The idea of Avatar forums where people would learn the Na'vi language, or people who even got depressed or even killed themselves because they couldn't go to Pandora, seems like the height of cringe. But then you look at theater reactions of people watching the Avatar 2 trailer, and there's something you see very rarely.
I need you to be strong.
Now have that technology, and I'll go in there as avatars. They have
Just pure elation and joy, an audience that has been fed so much sludge and so much Marvel snark for so long, it's like they're ready for a return to real sincerity and real cinema. Like after eating McDonald's burgers for over a decade, Gordon Ramsay himself came from the heavens to offer them a steak. To remember that vision of pure cinema and to be taken to a new world, to remember the far, far away. Nobody can remember the names of Jake Sully and Nefertari, but they can remember the feeling, the experience of seeing them trounce through the jungle and fly through the sky, like some long-lost emotional connection to a faraway land. I don't know how this is going to go. I'm trying to get this video out before Avatar 2 is released because I know right now the narrative is that James Cameron's going to have his first major flop. That was the narrative for Avatar, that was the narrative for Titanic, but the fact of the matter is when Cameron is working in a writer-director role with full control, he has never failed once. He's the most practical and skilled filmmaker working today, somebody who is easily the best at making mass-market entertainment. You could argue that maybe Spielberg deserves that title, but I can think of a half a dozen Spielberg movies that bombed or failed to find an audience. Cameron has something to say, you shut up and listen. I wouldn't call myself an Avatar head, I'm just a fan of my favorite Hollywood rage monster, and his ceaseless journey to push the medium forward. Quentin Tarantino stirred up a great bit of controversy recently when he said the current movie era is one of the worst in Hollywood history. Many people rebuked him, people like Simon Liu, and even frequent collaborator Samuel L. Jackson made retorts. But by the same token, my brother told me a story about how he went to see Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, in theaters with my dad, and they were both horrified as they were assaulted by a litany of movie trailers that felt like they were targeted towards children, culminating in the Super Mario movie trailer. Like the landscape has just become a wasteland filled with nothing but infantilized IPs and superheroes. Cinematic direct bereft of imagination that's just continuing an endless cycle of member-berry recycling of things people like and remember.
Yeah, I remember that.
But amidst this sea of limitless CGI crap, there is the distant roar, the roar of an ocean beckoning forward, echoing something new, something lost and ethereal, ready to connect and fulfill an empty need most people didn't even know that they had. And that is the need to find the way of water, to return to a magical realm that shows them something that they've never seen before, a return to the pure escapism and magic of a filmmaker who's firing on all cylinders, fulfilling a need people never knew they had. And in that regard, I'm rooting for Avatar. I want to see Cameron crush everything else as he takes his title back as the king. Even if now, through the power of corporate mergers, he's now technically playing on the same team as Disney and Marvel, I want to see the naysayers eat their words and gawk in horror as the masses just keep coming back again and again. And even if it sucks, it'll be the most interesting failure of all time, seeing how much time and technology has been sunk into it. Infamous canceled writer Max Landis, now in exile on his YouTube channel, had a pretty interesting take reflecting on Avatar.
I saw a post online that said, is anyone actually excited about the Avatar sequels? Has no one thought about this? Why is it every time the Avatar sequels are brought up to me, they're brought up to me in this thing of like, who even cares? No one even cares. They've been delayed forever. Like, what do you think about the Avatar sequels? Because I think about them all the time. Every time they're brought up to me, I'm reminded that these are the life-culminating passion project of James Cameron, a director who has arguably never made a bad movie and who debatably has only made great movies. How much do you know about the plot? Oh, they're a family story featuring the oceans. It's 4 movies. There hasn't been one leak. There have just been like authorized set photos of actors in the things. There hasn't been anything like this production process or publicity process in the history of cinema. This is one of the most ambitious, if not the most ambitious undertaking in filmmaking, in the history of filmmaking, and everybody's just like, oh, the Avatar sequels. Oh, because James Cameron's bad at making sequels. James Cameron doesn't take the premise of a first movie and explode it into something way better in a sequel. That's not literally what he's known for. I'm sorry, it's not like James Cameron is literally known for making massive technical innovations in special effects in every movie he makes. Even if these movies are bland and bad, which they absolutely won't be. Even if that was the case, it would still be one of the most interesting and historic boondoggles ever. I mean, you could write books about it. You could make documentaries about it. They spent 12 years making four sequels to the most successful movie of all time, and they turned out to be terrible. That will be culturally huge.
It doesn't matter. Either way we win. Either we get the greatest sequel of all time, or we get the most interesting misfire of all time. So I, for one, am personally ready to embrace the way of water and see what James Cameron has in store for me. Because, as South Park pointed out, only James Cameron is capable of raising the bar after it's fallen so low.
Music on! His name is James Cameron, the bravest pioneer. No budget too steep, no sea too deep. Who's that? It's him, James Cameron. Systems are normal. You guys hearing the song okay up there? James Cameron, explorer of the sea.
Yes, James, we hear the song.
Descending to 1,000 feet. I don't see the bar yet. Looks like it must have sunk pretty low. With a dying thirst to be the first. Could it be? Yeah, it's him, James Cameron.
Hope you enjoyed that video. I tried really hard to get this out before the movie hits theaters, so I guess we'll see who's right in the end. We'll know very soon. I'm curious to see if you guys are excited or cynical about the return of the Na'vi. As you can guess, I'm looking forward to it. Early reviews are pretty positive, but then again, people said they like Black Adam, and we're seeing that becoming a middling disappointment that might not change the hierarchy of power in the newly minted James Gunn DCU. So now I'd like to take a moment to tap into a greater power. You know, it's that time where we pay tribute not to the spirit of Awa, the literal manifestation of higher power in the Avatar universe. No, our god is a cold technological one. That is, of course, the god of
Algorithms! Math!
Yes, instead of connecting your head tentacles to the USB drive of nature and communicating with Home Tree or the Tree of Souls, you can communicate with the spirit of Susan and Stanley Tucci by clicking like, subscribe, and writing a comment. Feed me comments like Jake fed Nefertiri his long, hot hair tentacles as they made sweet, sweet love on Pandora. It helps me grow and makes me feel good, and it's a power only you have. And a special thank you to all the patrons of my own Home Tree who support my work. These are the guys and gals who plug their hair USB drives and directly connect to the Lobster Home Tree. They give me life, and hopefully I give them interesting videos early before I publish them on YouTube. So thank you for watching the video. See ya whenever I make my next one.